Paul, whenever you like.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, Paul, we can get started whenever you like because we're about 5 minutes after the official time.
Yeah, sure. Well, welcome everybody. We're just checking in if you just arrived in the chat line. If I think see most people have probably been putting in a little bit of info about where you're arriving from in the world. I'm super excited about this talk. In a moment, we'll hand over to Joe, who's going to be holding the space for much of the time today and presenting a little bit about regenerating the earth with ProSocial. And this is a partnership that has been a long time in the coming. Joe and ProSocial, Joe's been one of the earliest adopters, I guess, in many ways of ProSocial and one of our biggest advocates. And I've seen Joe present in many different contexts. And as most of you know, I'm sure many of you have seen Joe before. Super engaging speaker with this incredible capacity to understand multiple levels of systems and to weave together topics that we perhaps don't always put together in our minds. So this talk is going to be fairly short, and then we're going to make sure that we've got plenty of time at the end for people to go into breakouts and explore a little bit about what interests you in this topic and to share together any reactions that you might have had to Joe's talk. This is also, this webinar is also meant to be a little bit of a taster for a longer course offering that we'll talk about a bit later on, a 6-week course offering that ProSocial is going to be holding. So without, I've just got someone on audio there. Oh, muted me.
Sorry, Paul.
No worries. All right. Well, without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Joe. Joe, it's just a huge privilege to be working with you and to be bringing in the design school for Regenerating Earth together with ProSocial World in this partnership. So over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and hello, everyone. Lovely to have you all here today. I'm actually really excited about this for 2 reasons. One is, for those of you who know me, I care a great deal about the future health and well-being of our entire planet and the future flourishing of our species. And I also feel a really strong and deep camaraderie with ProSocial World. My relationship with ProSocial World goes back to about 2 years before they were an organization. Back when I was working with David Sloan Wilson at the Evolution Institute, when the ProSocial World organization was just a project there. And then it's grown into something that's having effects all over the planet. And so, so I'm really excited to be here with you all. And as Paul said, I'm going to try and give kind of a short talk. I'll speak for maybe 15 minutes or possibly up to 20 to give us a context for our conversation today. And so I'm going to introduce a huge topic that we could spend 10 years on, and I'm going to do it in 15 or 20 minutes, which means I'm really just trying to tease us into discussion. And so before we really begin, I just want to say that one of the things I care a great deal about is putting this knowledge into practice. And so while we'll be talking, like it's going to be something of a whirlwind tour of a couple of big ideas and a couple of examples of how we're putting it into practice, what I really want to do is create a sense of how important it is to learn ProSocial processes, how to manage ProSocial groups, and how to create ProSocial cultures for pretty much every challenging situation and difficult predicament that humanity has to address from here moving forward. So broad endorsement of ProSocial. And so with that said, I'd love to jump into presentation and then we'll come back out and have opportunity to get into some breakouts and then have some general sharing in the whole group. So let me just jump right in and get started. So to begin, I want to stress that this idea of bringing together ProSocial and Earth regeneration, I could frame it a different way, which is to say that we have to regenerate our capacities to cooperate. And what I mean by that is two things. One is you can look around the world and see a lot of ways people are not cooperating, and we have to restore or recuperate our capacities to cooperate. And then regeneration, which I won't go too much into the definition of regeneration, but I'll just say that regeneration is the continual process of renewal for any living organism or any living system. So we have to continually renew, like the starfish that regrows one of its arms or the worm that regrows its body. We have to continue regenerating and renewing our capacities to cooperate in the midst of conflict, in the midst of struggle, in the midst of hardship, because there's already a lot of that, and unfortunately, there's going to be a lot more. And so also I want to just say quickly that I chose this image of leafcutter ants, partly because I live in the tropics where we have leafcutter ants, but mainly because this is a reminder that being pro-social, which means learning how to cooperate and work in service to something greater than ourselves, is by no means a uniquely human thing. It's actually very, very common in the animal world, in the plant world, and even in the fungi world. And we can be reminded of that by seeing one of the greatest cooperators on Earth, the leafcutter ant. So this talk today is a collaboration between the Design School for Regenerating Earth, which I co-founded with my partners Penny Heipel and Benji Ross. And we're now actually bringing pro-social processes to the Great Lakes, to the Colorado Basin, and to Cascadia in North America, and then spreading out and sprinkling it into other places, including in Latin America. And we're beginning to collaborate deeply with ProSocial World around how people who are trained in ProSocial as facilitators can practice what they learn in real world communities where there is no shortage of real need. And so this talk today and the learning journey we're about to start in the middle of July is just dipping our toes into what we anticipate will be many ways of collaborating moving forward for all the work we're trying to do together. And so let's jump in. I wanted to start with two questions, sort of as provocations for us today. One question that should be really top of our minds when we're thinking about our current planetary situation is, how is it that humans came to be such amazing cooperators? That we could do things like create the International Space Station with collaboration from more than a third of all of the nations on Earth, with hundreds and hundreds of millions of human hours of time put into all the technologies and all the research and all of the data analysis and everything else that that represents. Or if you look at a simpler time compared to the International Space Station, but still very complex in its own right, how could humans cooperate to create great structures like the Pyramid of Giza or other structures that we see around the world? How did that evolutionary capacity come into being, and why are humans so good at cooperating? And at the same time, why have we been so bad at cooperating and addressing the planetary crisis that we're in today? And I just want these to be tantalizing questions for you, because when we think of things like biodiversity loss, the loss of topsoils, climate change, the spread of resource wars, water scarcity, you name it, all these things, we've got to get really, really good at cooperating, way better than we are right now. And to give you a sense of that, I want to start to say, we're going to talk today about regenerating the Earth. But before we can talk about regenerating the Earth, we need to talk about how humans have been degrading the Earth. So we could say, what would be our goal? What would it mean to regenerate the Earth? And I like to use this framework developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center called planetary boundaries. Now, the planetary boundaries is an answer to a really interesting question posed back in 2009, when this group of people called Earth System Scientists, which there are tens of thousands of people who might be considered Earth System Scientists that study some part of the Earth and its dynamic relationship to other parts of the Earth. And this group at the Stockholm Resilience Center asked a really interesting question. They said, with everything we know about the dynamic Earth, are there any thresholds or boundaries that if we crossed it, that we would leave this geologic age known as the Holocene, roughly the last 12,000 years of warm, stable climate, which is the only time in all of planetary history that we know where humans actually can create large-scale agriculture, city-states, and complex civilizations. We have zero evidence whatsoever of humans forming these complex social structures outside of the Holocene. And so they asked this question, are there any boundaries or limits that if we cross them could call into question a globalized civilization or a globalized economy? And they went back and did their research and they found that there were 9 of them. Now, we all know about climate change because that one gets a lot of attention in the news, but climate change is only one of these 9 boundaries. The other 8, really quickly, are biosphere integrity, which is the measure of biodiversity or the loss of species, the rate of extinction. So biosphere integrity is really important. There's one called land system change, which is taking healthy, complex ecosystems and degrading them into deserts, into monoculture agriculture, or into urban landscapes. Then there's freshwater use. There's biogeochemical flows of phosphorus and nitrogen associated with industrial agriculture for the production of synthetic fertilizers. There's ocean acidification. There's atmospheric aerosol loading, which is just a fancy way of saying air pollution. Then there's stratospheric ozone depletion because the ozone layer protects all living beings on the land surface of the planet from dangerous ultraviolet radiation from the sun. And then there's just a catch-all category called novel entities, which is something that humans create that the planet can't handle. So they found out there are 9 of these things, and they're like, all right, if there are 9 and we cross even 1 and our globalized civilization is called into question, then how are we doing? Have we crossed any? And in 2015, they published a big peer review paper where they found that we had already crossed 4. We had crossed the planetary boundaries, or the safe range for humanity, with climate change, the loss of species or the rate of extinction, the degradation or destruction of ecosystems, and this flooding of the world with reactive nitrogen, causing dead zones in the mouths of all the world's major rivers. And so they're like, all right, well, if we cross even 1, our globalized economy and global society is called into question. We've already crossed 4, but then the research continued, and those of you who know how science works, it takes a little while to publish new studies. So it wasn't until 2021 that they were able to get conclusive studies on freshwater use and ocean acidification, so they added them to the list. That doesn't mean we crossed those boundaries between 2015 and 2021. It's just that the state of knowledge wasn't good enough until then. So they added 2 more. But then in 2022, they added microplastics, these synthetic polymers created by humans that are in the breast milk of every mother on Earth and in every body of water on the whole planet, including deep in our aquifers. And so what this means is that there are 9 planetary boundaries. If we cross even 1, globalized civilization is called into question. And as of right now, we can say with confidence, we've crossed 7 of the 9. So if you want to say, what does it mean to regenerate the Earth? One answer that might be a pretty good one is to get back within the safe operating range for all 9 of these planetary boundaries. Now notice this is going to be a lot harder and take a lot more cooperation than simply getting carbon dioxide emissions lower enough to get below 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide or its equivalents, which is what almost the entire planetary sustainability discourse has been reduced to, even though the real picture is something much more holistic and complex. So this gives you a sense of where we are in the world today, why we have to get really good at cooperating, and why the ways that we're behaving now are clearly not adequate for the future of humanity or for the flourishing of life on our precious home planet. So what needs to happen for us to be able to restore planetary health is nothing less than this: recreate the conditions for living locally in terms of material flows, integrated life systems, and the thriving of families and communities everywhere on Earth that humans live. Now, this map is one that really intrigues me because the colors for the different parts of the map are different ecosystem types. Basically, the color represents a particular kind of landscape with a particular kind of climate, with a particular kind of soils, with a particular kind of ecology. And the diversity of these colors tells us that we should expect there to be a diversity of local economies and a diversity of local human cultures. And that means we've got to get really good, not just at cooperating with each other. We have to get really good at cooperating with local places, local climates, and local ecosystems. So ProSocial applies to all of this. So how would we organize humans to cooperate around the regeneration of the earth? Well, one way of thinking about this that has been particularly powerful for me is to ask, how does land naturally organize itself, and could humans organize themselves the same way? So if we were to say, decide to regenerate the entire massive continent of Africa, it might be helpful to know how we could leverage the natural organizing principles of the continent in service to our own cooperation. Now, this graphic you see here is a beautiful visualization of all of the river systems of Africa. And what you'll notice is that there are only a few hundred. I don't know how many it is exactly. Maybe it's 500, maybe it's 600, maybe it's 1,000. But you can imagine 500 to 1,000 human groups cooperating by organizing themselves around watersheds to cover the entire surface of Africa, where in each one of these tributaries and streams, there's a local group of people restoring soils, restoring native habitat, building on an economy that's harmonious with that local landscape. And that if people in one place are doing it while people are doing it in another, that they could cooperate in a fractal way and a nested way across multiple scales, from their local little streams and rivers all the way up to the scale of an entire continent. Which means, in principle, humans can cooperate to regenerate entire watersheds, which actually we have evidence of, entire continents, which has never happened before, but it's not that different from regenerating an entire watershed for all of the watersheds. And that means we could do it for every continent on Earth, possibly giving Antarctica a temporary pass since humans don't live on it and it's covered with ice. But maybe the other 6 continents would be a good place to organize ourselves in this way and work on restoring the health and vitality of natural ecosystems and bringing local human economies into harmony with them. That is a hell of a lot of pro-social. That's a lot of cooperation. So how do we do that? Well, it turns out where I live in the northern Andes of South America is a place where we're actually doing this at the scale that's needed. This is a topographic map of the land surface of Colombia. And what you can see colored in this salmon color is a regional climate system divided by 3 mountain ranges, or defined by 3 mountain ranges, with a precipitation pattern in the middle of it that creates a regional climate system. And the whole scale of it's about 500,000 hectares. Or said another way, it's about 25 miles across and 25 miles north to south, which means if those canyons and mountains weren't so difficult, you could walk from one end to the other in a day or 2. Instead, you might take a week because of the topography. But what we're doing is organizing ourselves around the regeneration of this entire landscape in Barichara, Colombia. And I just want to give you a little feel for how we're doing that to see what it would mean to cooperate at this kind of a scale. Well, first of all, here's a picture of Barichara so you can see it. Barichara is the town that I live in. This is not a false color photograph. It really is that beautiful. This is a picture taken from above the town in a beautiful community reforestation project known locally as Bioparque Moncora. And I just wanted you to see it to get a feel. This is a landscape that is beautiful. It's got a lot of clay in its soils. It's been heavily deforested. It's got a unique type of ecosystem like no other on Earth. It's the only high Andes tropical dry forest on Earth. And 8 out of 10 species are endemic, which means they don't exist anywhere on Earth. And unfortunately, in the last 80 years, 95 to 98% of the native forest has been cut down for industrial agriculture, which means this whole landscape is rapidly becoming a desert due to massive deforestation and the erosion that followed it. And we have a lot of work to do to restore the health of this place. So we set to work a few years ago creating a design school for healing the entire landscape. And the way that we did this is we went to existing local projects like Bioparque Moncora, this reforestation project, or other projects like Ojo de Agua, which is a community theater and learning space for kids to learn how to protect and restore watersheds. And there are also other reforestation projects, agroforestry and agriculture projects. There's all kinds of diversity of projects. And we started weaving them together in a collaborative framework around the restoration of watersheds, soils, native forest, and creating an alternative local economy. We did this with 4 major patterns of regeneration that operate at the territorial scale. So for those of you who can't read the small print on this, I'll just be summarizing this slide anyway, to say one of the ways we do this is we work on the restoration of entire watersheds. What that means is setting up community water councils. So that's a very important cooperative framework, and member-owned aqueducts for managing water as local watersheds. That we also set up a learning center in syntropic agroforestry, which is a way of creating native forest as well as productive forest for human purposes. That means forests that grow food, that grow timber, that grow medicine from medicinal plants, and that can grow textiles from plants used for making textiles. For example, in case you didn't know, cotton is actually native to the Northern Andes. So the cotton for making t-shirts is an example. So we've been creating demonstration sites and hosting workshops to spread these reforestation techniques across the territory. Then we're also working on transformation of local food systems. And what this means is establishing a community market where local food growers work together to create food sovereignty and food security for the people within the community while being sure the food is locally available. We're very blessed in Barichara that about 70% of our food is able to be grown within 10 kilometers or 6 miles of the town. By the way, on average, most places, especially most cities, are well less than 3% of the food that they eat can be found within 100 miles of where they are. So for us to be within 6 miles of where we are, getting 70% is a pretty big deal. And then another territorial pattern we're working on is the design of alternative economic systems, because clearly the global economy as we know it today, which is basically those who have money can exploit and extract and destroy other places while making them desperate and then creating slave labor and impoverishing them so that they can then further accumulate power by buying local governments. You all have seen the pattern. And so we need different economic models, which means we're investigating solidarity and community exchanges. And we're looking at ways to create community currencies, alternative money, ways of doing things that don't require money through what Colombians would call a minga, whereas people in the United States might think of as a barn raising, which is where all the neighbors come together and share their labor to do work together, and no one has to pay for that part of it because they know that later the neighbors are going to come and help them. And so by working in these different patterns of restoration of watersheds, the spreading of really powerful reforestation techniques, the creation of local food systems and alternative economic models, we are weaving together a tapestry of collaboration at the scale of our entire landscape. So how are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because there are principles and processes that we know about. So if you just study those leafcutter ants I mentioned at the beginning, this slime mold down here on the bottom, which is actually single-celled organisms that collaborate to create incredible complexity, you start realizing that living systems of the earth and the 3.8 billion years of life on earth has given rise to all kinds of social organization that gives us all kinds of different aspects of cooperation that we can learn from and that we can try to apply. So being pro-social in service to regenerating the earth means learning how the ants are pro-social, learning how the slime molds are pro-social, learning how birds and dogs and cats and whales, and of course humans, can be pro-social. And one of the questions we might ask is, what are the conditions for designing our way to higher levels of cooperation? How do those single-celled organisms in the slime mold cooperate in such massive ways? And so questions like this fall under the purview of pro-social, because being pro-social is learning how to design our way to higher levels of cooperation. And any of you who have studied pro-social or taken any of the trainings at ProSocial World will know that we can design our way to higher levels of cooperation through a set of core design principles for governing the commons. We can design our way to higher levels of cooperation around the emotional and psychological capacities that the members of groups have, and various really powerful management techniques. And so that's just to say that there's actually a lot that's known that we can apply for doing this. Another kind of question we might ask is, how do the patterns of interaction give rise to collective intelligence, just like this marmor of birds down in the bottom, or this school of fish that knows how to swim together to make it look like their body is as big as a humpback whale to keep predators from eating them, where basically the individual members of the group know how to interact with the other members of the group to create collective patterns. So how can we as humans use language? How can we use shared identity? How can we use the differentiation of roles and other kinds of collaboration to give rise to collective intelligence in human groups? See, we're going to need to know this kind of knowledge, if we want to successfully regenerate the earth. So now I just want to give a couple of really concrete examples of how we're doing this in Barichara, where I live. This is a picture of a group of people led by that man with his arms crossed there in the tie-dye shirt in the middle. His name's Felipe. This is a project called Pasos de Agua. Pasos de Agua is Spanish for the steps that the water takes, because they take children out and they walk the dry riverbeds and they talk to the landowners to ask what happened to the water and try and create patterns of regeneration to restore the watersheds. And then we bring in indigenous elders like this man in white, who's an elder of the Muisca tribe, which is located near Bogota, and we engage in sharing and exchanges. And so one way we can find patterns of interaction is to bring children and adults together around a shared purpose, like restoring the health of a river, which is something that's happening in this picture. Another thing we can do is we can encourage creative leadership among those children, and we can empower them to take action by listening to them, by teaching them things, by helping them translate our ideas into action. So after these kids walked the watershed, they actually created a set of interventions. By the way, that 6-year-old girl standing there with a list of ideas, 6 years old, her name is Quetzal. One of the ideas that's on that piece of paper is something from watching YouTube videos, which is what's called mycoremediation, which is to take bales of straw, tie them up with rope, inoculate them with fungi that can fix heavy metals in the water, and drop those bales of straw into the rivers as natural biofilters. These kids are on YouTube and using the collective intelligence of the internet to be able to come up with great ideas, but they need the adults to empower them and to listen to them, to help them get the supplies that they need, to experiment with them and help them learn. Another really powerful way that we engage in collaboration is we weave learning across generations. This picture on the right is Gabriela, the grandmother, and Soraya sitting in her lap, the granddaughter. And we make a point in Barichara when we're making important decisions that the elders sit in a circle and talk, and the kids play all around us, so that we're constantly reminded that everything we're doing is in service to future generations, which invokes our sense of legacy and generosity to be more cooperative than we would otherwise be without it. Another thing that we can do is provide social scaffolding, which is we can create temporary supports that help people to learn and do things together, to work around shared goals. What you see happening in this picture is the younger kids are on the left and the older kids are on the right. Those older kids are about to go do some watershed restoration work. Older kids here meaning they're between the ages of 7 and 10. And the younger kids are between the ages of 3 and 6. My daughter's actually there in the little purple jacket in the middle. And these kids on the left are bringing totemic objects, natural objects that they recognize as having gifts that they give to empower the older kids in their journey of restoring the watershed. So this way of having one group create a social support for another group can increase our cooperation and empower us to do more things together. Another thing is all this work is happening in Colombia, where some of you may know, Colombia has a history of really intense violence in the last century. So there's a lot of trauma and a lot of healing that's needed. So there's a lot of work that's done among the adults to build trust and heal these cultural wounds and to open our hearts into expressions of love so that we can act in service to our children, to our place, to our community, and the various things that we love. So this way of focusing on building trust and on healing cultural wounds is a huge focus of regenerative work that is profoundly pro-social. And then here's a provocative question for you. because the adults have heavily been traumatized. And I would actually argue that consumer culture, that modern society, that most of industrial education in the world actually traumatizes children and creates traumatized adults. The market economies we live in, the political discourses that we're in, the violence of our world. But what if the children were never traumatized in the first place? That's one of the things we're taking very seriously. This is a picture of my daughter, Elise, as she's planting a cactus in our food forest that she and I are growing together. And you can just see how empowered, how confident, how creative, and how free she is as she paints her face and dresses up like a fairy and does all kinds of things that, in this picture, she was almost 6 years old. Now she's 6.5. So to ask the question, what if the children were never traumatized in the first place, is to really say, how can all of the adults cooperate to create nurturing, safe spaces for the children through the sustained period of their entire developmental lives? And just imagine how much cooperation is involved in doing that. And we're trying to do that right now in Barichara, Columbia. So the basic recipe, this is like the ProSocial training in 1 minute. To say there's so much more I'm not going to go into, because this is a rapid run through of some of these ideas, is that to be able to be ProSocial, you need to have a common identity and a common purpose. And then the members of any group that have this common purpose need to have the psychological flexibility to learn new things, to change their perspectives, to have empathy and perspective taking, to be able to creatively explore new possibilities, to try things, drop them when they don't work, and then try new things. Psychological flexibility is a really big deal for success in any endeavor in life. And then we need emotion regulation, the ability to manage our feelings, which is something that I think we've all experienced when we've been in a group and we got overwhelmed, got too stressed, too angry, too scared, and we couldn't contribute to the group. Or maybe we actively undermine the group by creating conflict. So emotion regulation and psychological flexibility are foundational to being ProSocial. And then we employ common purpose, our ability to manage our emotions and our ability to creatively explore possibilities with a variety of other capacities for taking action together, which, for those of you who have heard of the work, there are 8 core capacities, sometimes called design principles, for governing any common pooled asset. And like I said, I'm not going to talk about all this here because this is what you'll learn in our learning journey or in any ProSocial facilitator training. But it's to say that there are various capacities, such as the capacity to have fair and inclusive decision-making, or the capacity to have collaborative relationships with other groups, or to have the capacity to equitably distribute benefits and contributions for participation to feel fair and inclusive. So there are different capacities that every group needs to have. And we need to be able to manage our emotions and flexibly explore possibilities as we collaborate together in service to our common purposes for whatever scale of work we're doing, everything from planting a tree to regenerating an entire continent. And so this is what we're going to explore together in this upcoming learning journey that starts on July 17th. And this webinar is sort of like the teaser trailer for in a way, but I hope you're learning more than just a teaser in this. And so that's really what I want to talk with you all about and what I wanted to stimulate conversation for in our discussion today. And so I want to pass it back to Paul to help us facilitate the rest of the conversation. And so Paul, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Joe. Gosh, I don't think I've ever seen a talk from you that hasn't left me feeling like, oh, wow, that's incredible. I just started to get thinking about so many aspects of what we do. Thank you. Well, look, what I'd like to do actually, Anna Papera is going to be one of our co-facilitators on the upcoming course. Anna, I just wondered if you might like to have a minute or two to comment on anything you wanted to say, really. Intro yourself, comment on Joe's presentation.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. I am a behavior analyst, and I came to ProSocial through the way of acceptance and commitment therapy or contextual behavioral science. And during my first pro-social facilitator training. That's when I met Joe. He came and he did a presentation at the end of it. And I've also been engaging with the design school, which is the community that Joe is leading right now, and helping to support different bioregions all over the world. And I'm part of the Great Lakes Basin's bioregions. I'm part of a watershed within the Great Lakes Basin. So I've been actively learning how to use ProSocial in this context, and Joe's been a great teacher and mentor of all of us. So I'm really excited to be able to combine those things. I'm also, I know several faces here, I'm also the engagement catalyst for ProSocial Commons. So I frequently help groups and I help scaffold their resources and support them as they get started within the ProSocial Commons, and always bring in the ProSocial CDPs and the and contextual behavioral science in supporting them to be more collaborative.
Thanks, Anna. I'm really looking forward to working with you. Great. And my intro, I'm also a psychologist by training, and spent my whole career really working in the space of trying to improve human relations, particularly in the workplace, trying to help groups become more cooperative, to communicate more effectively and be more harmonious and be able to resolve conflicts. So seeing this application, I mean, there is no more important issue than thinking about how we can weave together not just human cooperation, but weave ourselves together with the entire biosphere. There's just no bigger challenge and no more important issue for us to be working on. And I really loved something that you said, Joe, about how can we use language and shared identity to give rise to collective intelligence in groups? Because I guess I did want to emphasize that any solution that we have, if it was something that our problem-solving minds could deal with, then we would have done it together. Joe asked the question at the beginning about how are we such great cooperators, but so poor at cooperating with this. And I think it's got so much to do with our identities. Our identities, what we define success as, what we think a good life is, who we think others are, and also our habitual ways of responding to stress. And Joe pointed to the need for emotional regulation and perspective taking at the end. And the habitual ways that we relate to challenges, in this case, are just digging us deeper and deeper as we strive for ways to make our lives happier and happier while avoiding the huge elephant in the room. It's not really an elephant in the room anymore. It's very visible to people, but it's something that we still seem to, as a society, not be able to grapple with collectively. So ProSocial's evolving a lot, and this course that we're going to have is going to be primarily, obviously, around the issue of regenerating Earth, and we'll just be weaving ProSocial in response to Joe's leadership. We'll be weaving ProSocial in around that topic. So hopefully you might be able to come with us. Now, I did just want to share one very practical thing before we go into our breakouts, and that is, if you are interested in the course, I'm just going to share screen for a moment. Hopefully I can do that. There it is. It's a little tricky right at the moment on our website, finding where the course is. I don't think it's up yet under the, oh, there it is. It's been put there. Great. It's not that tricky. So just go to Get Started or Community, and you'll find, if you scroll down just a little, you'll find the course listed there if you're interested in it. And there's a lot more information there. Joe's also got a direct link. Thank you so much, Joe. That's really helpful. All right. So without further ado, we'd love to just put you in breakouts and invite you to reflect on a couple of questions. What are your reactions to Joe's presentation? Anything you'd like to say? We'd love to hear from you. We'll come back into a plenary and have a bit of an open discussion. And if you've got some headspace for it, what would you like to learn or experience if you were to take part in a 6-week course around this? We'd really love to hear from you and inform our thinking about what we might include. It's going to be an extremely dynamic 6 weeks. You'll notice if you go to that website that we haven't actually laid out a week by week syllabus. And the reason for that is because we'll be responding to the group and we'll be evolving the course in response to the group's needs. So this starts here. All right. That clear to everyone what we're going to be doing? Yeah. Notice that some people are dropping off. I guess some people are not really in the mood for talking to others. That's fine. Great. I will open up the rooms and we'll take 10. Let's see, what do we got? Just take a few minutes with that. What do you reckon, Joe? We've got 15 minutes. Maybe we should just do it in a plenary.
Well, I think we're getting to a small enough group. Maybe we could. But
Yeah.
Actually, well, I would put it up to people. So maybe raise one hand if you would like to stay in this main group, and two hands if you would like to go into breakouts. And see, so 2 hands for breakouts. Seeing sort of a mix. I'm encouraging people to put it on their videos. Yes, I am. So I'm seeing about 50-50 from those who have.
Yeah, me too. That was thoroughly inconclusive. I think it's up to us to make a decision. I think maybe we should stay in the plenary, Joe. If that's all right.
Sure thing.
All right. Well, let's do 5 minutes. All right, 5 minutes in breakout, and then we'll come back together. You can at least get to meet someone. See you soon.
Perfect.
This meeting is being recorded.
Which is that the vast majority of intentional communities fail. Well over 90% of them fail. And the main reason they fail is interpersonal conflict, usually related to infidelity, to basically bad sexual behavior and bad intimacy behavior. And so we're thinking of consciousness, which the consciousness movement has really robust versions and really kooky, weird, just not based in anything versions. And so when we get into the part that's like, we've got to be really good at being in relationships. Like that's fundamental to being intentional in community. And that's where I think a lot of this work, especially the contextual behavioral science work, it's so valuable to know how the psychology of people relates and how their own emotional responses in their bodies relate to their ability to manage their emotions in relationship. It's just such a big deal. So, hi, welcome back, everyone. How are your breakouts? Jeez, Paul, do you want to facilitate this part, or do you want me to?
You can. You go right ahead.
Well,
I just put a request in the chat, though. If we've only got a few minutes, so I guess I would request maybe you could put some things in the chat as well. If you've got any suggestions or things you'd like to learn from a course, that would be awesome for us. Or questions. Over to you, Joe.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if everyone's okay, there are, 14 of us here? If we just did a quick 30-second to 1 minute per person, we'd go about 10 minutes over. Better give everyone the chance to share. So if that sounds good, we could, and anyone who doesn't feel like sharing can pass it forward. So if you don't feel like sharing, you can also refrain from sharing. And so what I would love to do is invite whoever would like to share first, if someone is ready, to share just something you learned, something you're reflecting on, something that resonated for you, something you'd like to learn in the course, any of these prompts. Just share for 30 seconds to a minute, be mindful of time. And then if you would pass it to the next person so that we can just seamlessly move. And if it comes to you and you don't want to share, just pass it forward. So Heidi has raised her hand. So does it sound like an okay way to do this? Everyone feel good? Cool, then Heidi, please, I'd love to hear from you.
I jumped in because what was in my mind parallels some of what I heard Gwen saying. and I couldn't help but follow after that. The question you posed is, why are we so bad at cooperating at this large scale in crisis? Because we're not awake. And the reality that we've grown accustomed to is not reality. We don't see where and how much we are all energy in an energy system, and that there are ways that we can connect that are extraordinary that we're not tapping into most of the time. So I think that that's all I wanted to share. 30 seconds, hopefully maybe even less. And whoever would like to go next.
Anyone who would like to receive the baton?
I'll go
This is the
next.
reason for-
So,
This is
oh,
the reason
sorry.
for passing it forward.
Yeah,
Mark,
that's right.
Mark, please.
Well, Joe, first of all, your story is a lovely story. The thing that touched me most is having the children at the feet of the adults doing the healing work in their own relationships and in the country. So what a pleasure to see that happen. And I know in my culture, most people are taken out of having time even to care for their children. We outsource that and we go to work and all these other dynamics. So the challenge for me is to connect with people in my community, in my bioregion, who know the scale of this work and are committed to be starting in a small group to do that healing work with themselves and with the country, and create collaborative systems that allow it to flow into a large scale social change effort. So, and I'll pass over to Heidi.
Heidi already went.
Heidi's just went. Yeah.
Wow. I'll go to Ron.
Well, I appreciated the conversation, and Tamlin and I had quite a conversation about Australia and America and how we have not listened to the indigenous people. And I want to get together with Anna and save the Buffalo. It's not Buffalo, it's Buffalo, the beautiful river. So thank you all, and we're huge fans of Eleanor Ostrom. But I will tell you, the problem of coming up with an alternative economy is huge. My work is with the MBA, and that is a big mountain to climb, but it is a way to organize ourselves. So thank you. And I will pass it to Tamlin.
I just had that moment thought that from little things, big things grow. You know, just that idea that it just takes a few people, and just from a few people, a few drops of rain, something gathers and something gets bigger, and eventually then the movement happens. So I'm leaving this, you know, in a really positive headspace. So thank you all, and thanks for inviting me.
Then would you like to pass it forward?
Oops. How about Hal?
Okay. I was thinking, okay, what if you weren't living in a land of, you know, forests and grass plains and so forth? If you were living in a more modern, how do we apply any of this kind of thinking to the kind of world where I live? And I think maybe I was thinking about how to break down the different processes. You have a breakdown of different natural processes, but we have to deal with the breakdown of things like political processes. How does the political system reproduce itself through choice in elections? How integrate that with what I call practical epistemology, making sense of communally making sense of the world, which we're doing extremely badly these days. Education, institutionalism, civil society, maintenance of an individual's fit in the world, which gets disrupted naturally by various circumstances, and a remedial action that we have to be constantly dealing with because we've nearly spoiled the planet, and coping with a moving target world, which is to say 5 years from now, the media landscape is going to look different from the way it does now, like it or not. So if I don't know what's going to happen in this course. Are we going to be doing projects within our own milieus? If so, this is how I believe I need to think.
Yep, lots to wrap your head around for sure. Would you
Yeah.
like to pass it forward?
Oh yes. Who's not? Let's see. Gwen did not go yet.
I might just respond a little to Hal, if I could, just how the structure of the course is going to be the weekly webinars, but also then community calls. So there'll be opportunities very much within the community calls to be responding to one another, to learning from one another. And most of us live in urban contexts, so I'm sure that's going to be very much a big part of what we're talking about. Thank you. Sorry, who was it being passed to?
On to Gwen.
Gwen.
Yeah, just something that clarified for me is, just two simple things that feel like always build more pro-social capacity. And that's to build a relationship with someone who has a similar mission, someone you don't know, because that creates more connectivity. And then to do something to come into more personal alignment with what you care most about. So the inner peace. And I feel like when I keep my mind on those two things, that's always going to get me down the road pro-socially. So yeah, that was what was up. Thanks. And I'll pass to, let's see, W. Hunter.
Hello. Yes, I'm a bit familiar actually with Joe's work. I don't know if you remember, but we've spoken before. And then Eleanor Ostrom, David Sloan Wilson, I cited them heavily when I did my legal note. So a lot of the presentation was a bit like, yes, but kind of left me at a point of like, I'm not sure what I'd get out of the class. And I shared this a bit with Anna and kind of some of the logistical questions that posed for me. And so maybe she can share those later to not waste my 30 seconds. But I really appreciated seeing some of the additional details of the work that was going on and relating that to the work that I do here in Southwestern Virginia, where, we're able to hit 3 of those 4 that you mentioned. We don't have water councils or anything to that effect, but there's the potential for them to be formed around a project that would effectively destroy one of our streams and the lick that is a convergence of multiple streams in the area. But around local food security, one of the big ones that we address, in an urban setting, which maybe would spark for some people here, but like composting, the amount of the ways of dealing with waste. I've spent some time in the Andes as well, and seen, the different, I want to see who made the comment earlier. Cabot talked about how it might be more easy to apply these principles in a more, I'm not sure, traditional versus American or modern, postmodern is really the best way to break them down, as they lend themselves to hierarchical thinking. But just the different histories from which people are thrown give you very different cultural relevancies that people bring to every social engagement. And the way that we produce waste and engage with it, and even our language says that we're going to throw something away. And where is away? Where do these things go? And so taking accountability for all of the personal things that we do in the world is at least one way that I would like to see, I guess, how that translates, as well as some of the very practical questions around the body politic and organizing and helping certain entities that are maybe large in your local area, who are the nonprofit industrial complex players that in many ways act as the gatekeepers to facilitate them being more pro-social, and kind of some of the barriers of even encouraging change to an entity that has those institutional mindsets. So I'm sure I went on longer than I should have. But Cabot, since I talked about your message, why don't you go next?
Okay. I think you can hear me. Yeah, wow. Geez, everything's, what? Pardon?
No, we can hear you just fine. You're
Okay.
coming through.
I thought I knew what I was going to talk about, but that last one threw me for a loop. Yeah, I guess I put that question in there not so much as a really more to thinking about it. I think it emphasizes how every context is different, and every context is very complex. And something Tamlin said, which was from little things, big things grow. And I think maybe that, because it's easy to feel overwhelmed, especially when you have a steep learning curve ahead of you, which I think I still do. So yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there. Thanks. Let's see, passing to David.
Hi, yeah, so a couple of thoughts that came through my mind is I think Joe, maybe you started off asking what possibly are the greatest challenges, and it immediately brought me back to one of my beloved teachers, Joanna Macy. Some of you may know her, and the biggest obstacle that we face is apathy. And we are conditioned into the current format of apathy. And it is up to us to find the ways to regenerate our more active, sympathetic selves. So that's the challenge. I also see a challenge as how do we bring more coherence to the movements themselves so that we are strategically, exponentially accelerating the transition that we're engaged in right now for the good of all. And I'll leave it at that because I know time is short.
So I know that the two remaining are Earl and Anna. So maybe if Earl would like to go next, and then Anna can bring us home. So Earl, on to you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. One thing I note, this conversation we're having right now is, in my way of looking at good pro-social conversation. We're opening up. We're saying things that we believe and feel and that is important. So I appreciate that. One thing about I thought about, well, how do you start organizing, with different meetings and so forth. And I'd like to propose that everyone take a look online at something called the Greenfire Times. That is a bi-monthly newsletter in northern New Mexico. New Mexico has many cultures. There's been a lot of cultural clashes over the decades and centuries. And there's tension still. But there's a lot of, in the younger generation especially, a lot of collaboration on things going on. But the Greenfire Times highlights all these cultures. People from all the cultures write for articles about what they're doing to regenerate. So I think having something like that's a tool. If we were to begin, Joe, forming a group in northern New Mexico, a bioregion, we start through the Greenfire Times, because that's where the conversations are already happening, not in an organized way. The other thing is, in terms of getting people to be pro-social, and our culture has been one of separation and top-down hierarchical power and so forth that appeals to the worst in humans, right? Greed, power, etc. And one thing that really broke clear for me some years ago was a book called In Search of the Lost Feminine by Craig Barnes. And I recommend looking at that. It's a fascinating look at what happened to cultures in early Greek culture, where there were two kinds of cultures: the masculine, raiders of different resources. And then there were a culture of the more feminine-led cultures of peace and cooperation. And obviously the masculine ones won out. But I recommend the book. It's fascinating. It really makes you understand where we are right now. So those two things. And then again, the last thing, as I mentioned in the breakout room, was the organization I work with on the board is Common Home of Humanity. All right, so that is proposing that the UN declare the global climate as an entity to be the common heritage of humankind. We're working on that. I won't go into details because of time, but if we had that in place, that gives the climate legal standing it doesn't have right now. And it puts forth a way of recognizing that heritage of humankind that belongs to us, not to the corporations or not to national nation states and so forth. So those are three things I recommend, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Earl. That really touches on the rights of nature movement that's more commonly understood as relating to rivers, but can relate to other aspects of nature as well. So thank you for that. Anna, on to you.
Thanks, Joe. I've seen aspects of that talk in person when you came to visit the Great Lakes, and I think every time I hear it, I feel like I get something else out of it, because it's wonderful listening to the same thing and also just what you add on, the different layers. So what I'm looking forward to is learning, having a similar experience, but in a new group of people. It seems like every single time I've heard you talk, when it's with a different group of people, it becomes a different learning experience. And how can we learn from each other too, is I think really incredible in this space and learning journeys. So I think that it'll be really interesting as we move forward to see what are the barriers that people are experiencing, and how can we change perspectives in our communities. How are we thinking about how it's going to be embedded in our communities, and we can continue learning that way. So
yeah, thanks for that, Anna, and thank you, everyone. One thing I would like to just add and then pass it to Paul to close us is just to say that I feel like we shouldn't be learning unless we're applying what we're learning. And that's just like a general broad claim. And so I see, especially in a moment such as the one we're in, that the context is created by those who arrive. And then what does that group of people want to do together as they become a group, even if it's temporary for 6 weeks? And so what do we do together, and what is the course? And like, Hunter, should you join it, or should you just join the design school, which sounds like you should do that too for a whole other reason, for us to all collaborate at the bioregional scale. But like, it's more like, what is the shared purpose that's emerging? And what I learned as a form of very active humility is, when I'm helping a pro-social context to emerge, I invite what other people's purpose is that motivated them to come, for us to create together from the real purpose that they're there. And then that is what we begin to do together, is what that collection of people at that moment in time. And so it's like, oh, everyone came to hear Joe talk about blah, blah, blah. But what are you really here for? Like when we gave a talk in Peonia, Colorado, and we asked everyone that was there who came to a pro-social teach-in, they came to see who else came. It turned out that was what they were. That was like 70% of them wanted to see who else was going to show up. And then they formed a collaborative framework because they were looking for who they could collaborate with in their own community. They weren't looking for the speaker. I was just a mechanism for them to come together around as an outsider, because I don't live in Colorado. And so I'm really intrigued by what is the emergent purpose as a group of people come together around some affinity, something that brought them to that shared moment. So maybe that would be what I will leave you to reflect on, is what is your purpose? What is pulling you forth that brought you here today to this talk and this webinar? And that will pull you forth to whatever it is next, whether it's the learning journey or the design school or some other thing, whatever it is, because we just need people awakened and following their purpose. So that's what I will offer back. And so thank you all, and then I'll pass it to Paul.
No, thank you all, and we'll wrap up now, but we hope to see you again on the course or elsewhere. It's been wonderful. Thanks, Joe. That was great. Bye for now, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.